Good morning, everyone. Hey, we're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. I just want to send out a friendly reminder that this is a sold-out seminar. So we encourage everyone, scooch together, get to know your neighbors. If you have any bags or books on the seats, please remove them. Every single seat in the house is going to be taken. Such an exciting topic today, so we definitely have a lot of people trying to get in. Again, if you can scooch together, we are going to be making some last-minute entries in here. So if you have open seats, I kind of see some here, but just prepare for them to fill up. Thank you.
Yeah. If you have an empty seat next to you, raise your hand. We're taking a little seat count here. 1, 2. Any over here? 3, 4, 5, 6. Any empty seats? 7. Any empty seats back there? It's like 7, 8. Okay.
All right. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you all for coming to our 2019 market forecast. Everyone wants to know what's going to happen next year. You're going to find out today. Just to begin, happy holidays, everyone. They're here. I wanted to quickly do a couple announcements. For the rest of this season, we are working with the Make-A-Wish Foundation in Arizona. We are trying to help a child like Penelope. Penelope was here, was a wish child in Arizona. She had a wish to go to New York City. It takes about $10,000 to grant a child's wish. Penelope actually got her wish granted. You can see she's in New York City. That was her wish to go to New York City, and there she is. So we're going to try to raise $10,000 by the end of this year to help a child. We have Giving Tuesday, which is going to be the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. We are going to match any donations that our students put in. We're going to match that. So remember, on November 27th, anything you donate, we will match it. Let's see what else. The other thing is keep an eye out for an email you're going to get with, I think it'll come on Sunday, that will be a survey. We want to know what you guys want to learn about next year for these seminars, so let us know. Let us know how this class is, and let us know what you want to learn about next year, and we will make it happen. Finally, we're going to start off with our sponsors. Karen with B Lending, and Raul with Agulo is going to speak. So I'm going to pass it off to them. Thanks all for coming.
Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Casso. I'm with BE Lending. We are an asset-based lender for residential and commercial properties here in Phoenix. We also lend in other states as well. Just ask us at the booth if you're interested in that. We are strictly asset-based, so it's only the loans are based off of the property itself. We don't typically pull credit or verify income, and we can close in 24 hours if necessary. We also have a construction loan program as well. So we have a booth outside. Stop by. We have a $50 gift card drawing going on. Please drop your card in the bowl and enjoy the seminar. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Raul Guevara. I'm a tech entrepreneur, real estate investor, and I'm here to introduce you to Agulo. We're going to be outside. We have our booth set up, and we're going to be doing a raffle. Our company provides virtual reality 360 walkthroughs for your listings. Our technology is a do-it-yourself solution that allows you to white label a 360 tour that you can assemble yourself or have us assemble for you. Our tours can be shared via a URL to your clients on any social media platform. And we're going to give away a tour today. So if you drop your card off, you have a chance to win. And please stop by and visit us and learn more. Thank you.
Hey guys, how are we? Good morning. Welcome to our, I don't know what year we're on. We do this every year. We have a lineup of speakers as we always do. But first thing I want to talk about is this is a week that we honored veterans. So raise your hand. Actually, stand up if you've served our country. Stand up. Thank you very, very much for your service. Now raise your hand if you stayed at home and one of your relatives went off to serve our country. Thank you for your service as well. Every Monday morning I send out a reflection, and this Monday morning this is what went out. A number of years ago, while I was attending a veterans lunch, a female officer took the podium to speak about her service in Iraq. While on duty, she was hit with a rocket in the shoulder, which severed her arm, burned her face, and left her for dead. After weeks in a coma, months of surgery, and ongoing rehab, she now tells her story of survival and recovery. Today, she said, today I can only remember her first name, which was Dawn. However, I should never forget the story and the two quotes she referenced during her story. Here's what she said. You never know how strong you are until strong is the only choice you have. Sometimes it takes the death of your dream to find your destiny. Thank you again for all those who have served. While we're on kind of that note, we want to pay special tribute today. Most of you know the name of Wayne Stutzer. Wayne Stutzer was here for many, many years doing our seminar. You might remember the year he fell sick, couldn't make it with us. He never quite recovered from that, and he passed away of cancer this past year. So we just a moment of prayer for Wayne and his family. Thank you. A little lighter note, the school's doing Make-A-Wish Foundation. I'm actually having a drive this year called Make-A-Dish Foundation. And I want you to bring by food for me around Thanksgiving. Your favorite dish I'll take. Is that okay? Just all Thanksgiving week, and I'll be here to pick up your favorite dish. Our first speaker, who is always graces with it on this stage. Matter of fact, he told me this morning, and I'm so honored he told me this, that he's cutting back on what he does. He used to do over 100 speeches a year. He's now doing just 10. And he's chosen us to be one of the 10. So we thank him for that. You might know him very well. Everybody knows him. Every November he's with us. Here's how I best remember him. Remember the commercial that says, when E.F. Hutton talks, everybody listens? Well, here's what's true about this man. When Elliot Pollock speaks, everybody really, really listens. We welcome Elliot Pollock to our stage. Thank you, Elliot.
Alrighty, let me turn this.
Is this what you're pointing? There you go.
We got to get the logistics right here. Well, I appreciate being here. I'll put this here. And we're going to talk about what's going on in the economy and what's going on locally and what's likely to happen. So let's see. So we're in about the 7th inning, maybe the 8th inning, okay? Basically, is the party over? No. Are we near the edge? Not really. And is the economy going to continue to grow? Yeah, absolutely, okay? At above 3%, like Trump wants? Not really, all right? And that's simply because you can calculate how much the economy can grow at any point in time by growth in productivity and growth in the workforce. And we've finally recovered to the point where we should be. But going forward, and it's the blue line is the one you ought to look at, is the labor force is going to be growing slowly. So unless you get some amazing growth in productivity, you just can't get to 3%. The numbers don't work. And the other thing that's interesting is the dark line is BA and above, and the red line is basically blue-collar guys. And the growth in the labor force is all in people who are highly educated. And so you're going to continue to see basically wage gains, mainly in the blue-collar area. Some of them are probably pretty smart because AI will, and artificial intelligence, they'll be the ones that are replaced first. But that, essentially, you can't get there from here in terms of, but the economy, the recovery is old but strong, okay? Essentially, you have a lot of things going right now. You have tax cuts. You have fiscal policy, which is incredibly stimulative. You have a significant trade war being unlikely. We'll go into that. Strong plant and equipment spending. And by imbalances, we'll talk about it in a minute, but recoveries just don't die. They die of something. And the thing that would kill a recovery isn't there yet. It's too early to tell how much the economy is going to slow from the rapid growth it's had in the last couple of quarters, but it's likely to be mild to the mid-2s. Not bad. A recession is going to happen at some point. The economy is basically cyclical. So what? But right now, the imbalances seem mild. And again, most recoveries, or most recessions, when they do occur, are short and shallow. What we had last time around was basically a once-in-100-year event. It was an aberration in history. And so don't get used to that. But things can change quickly, so you have to keep your eye on things. The strong economy this is the way it works. You have strong growth in demand, and that leads to strong labor markets, which leads to declines in unemployment, which tends to lead to higher wages, which leads to higher inflation. About that time, the Fed says, you know what, we got to start tightening to get ahead of this thing. We'll talk about the Fed in a second, but they're in a real bind. If there was a recession at the moment, they'd be in real trouble because they don't have any bullets in their gun. The bullets in the Fed's gun are interest rates, and the higher the interest rate. All right, leading indicators, very strong. Consumer confidence, very strong. Treasury spread, again, this is the spread either between 10-year government bonds and 2-year bonds. I use 10 to 3 months But again, it's down, but it's not close to inverting at this point. Unemployment's still going down. The employment to population ratio is increasing. In other words, a lot of people who left the economy are now coming back. And that will keep things going because we need more labor. We're short of labor. Consumer prices are really still under control. This is the CPI, the one you're used to looking at. The one the Fed looks at is the implicit price deflator for personal consumption expenditures, excluding food and energy. And that's right where they want it, at 2%. So they basically are trying to get in front of the game with what they're doing. A financial obligations ratio, which is how much of your income you spend on previously accumulated debt, is really back where it was in the 80s. That's not an issue. This is stimulative at this point in that right now the government is running increasingly large deficits. That is a problem for the long term. It is highly unusual. In fact, it's unprecedented that you're running higher deficits this late in the cycle. This is something that hasn't been done before, and it's not good. Pending home sales index, despite what you hear, it's still very high. And so what keeps me up at night? Well, this keeps me up at night. There are 7 million unfilled jobs in this country. And then on all blue-collar jobs, a lot of them are high-tech jobs. About 700,000 of them are high-tech jobs. The employment versus the labor force. Since 2011, employment is growing more rapidly than the labor force, which means you're going to deplete the pool of people who are out there who can come back into the labor force. And so that's a problem. The employment cost index, which is the best indicator of what's going on with prices, is actually closer to 3% than 2%. And auto loans, you're actually starting to get an increase in the default ratio in auto loans. Pretty early in the cycle for that. That kind of bothers me. And so how about bear markets? When I went to school, I used a book by a guy named Paul Samuelson. And one of his famous quotes was, "The stock market has predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions." And he was right, all right? While the cyclically adjusted P/E ratio is incredibly high, it's higher than at any point except October 1929 and late 99, 2000. Here's the real truth. You've had 36 corrections since the end of World War II. Corrections, a decline of 10% or more. Basically, only a third of them have been connected with a recession. And then in terms of bear markets that came out of that, 7 times in those 12 recessions you've had a bear market, which is a decline of 20% or more. But you know, when you've had no recession, you've had it 4 times. So essentially, the stock market is not something that really is a great predictor of things, interestingly enough. All right, trade war. All right, the Canadians were really upset with us, and they were going to build a wall along our northern border, and so they had a demonstration project. This is what it looked like. So the effects of a trade war are higher prices and inputs. You guys in new construction are clearly seeing that because it's affecting everything from wood to flooring. Some jobs will come back, but not a lot. It's all about intellectual property rights. Guess what happens when an American high-tech company goes to China to produce? Guess what happens with their technology? It's given to the Chinese. Okay? And that's what Trump is really trying to stop. Like most things with Trump, he can't enunciate it, but that's another issue. So it's going to have a relatively minor effect on the economy here, and here's why. This is a game the Chinese can't win, and it's this simple. 23%, or well, 20% of China's economy is exports, and about a quarter of that goes to the U.S. So 5% of their economy depends on the U.S. The U.S., on the other hand, basically, it's about 8% that we export, and about 8% of that goes to China. To us, it's a rounding error, right? So China doesn't want a recession here, nor can they win this battle. And it'll be settled when the intellectual property rights issue is settled. That's what this is about. Everything else is superfluous. And you saw an idea of what's going to happen when Trump started to subsidize agriculture for their losses because of what's going on with China. That's likely to happen across the board at some point. So again, 65% of our trade deficit is with China. To give you some perspective, that's $365 billion a year. The next highest trade deficit is with Mexico at $71 billion. And then Canada with like 16 or 18 billion. So essentially, it's a lot of noise. It gives CNN something to talk about, but it's basically nothing. This cycle is no spring chicken. It is now 113 months old. By this summer, it'll be the oldest recovery in American history. It's a long history. And so things don't last forever. But it's not over. Expansions don't die of old age. You've heard me say this before. They die because something goes wrong, either an asset bubble or the Fed gets too far ahead of itself in terms of credit tightening or some exogenous shock, namely a war or oil price shock. You know, and the economy is getting older. Like people who get older, they're more subject to disease. It's the way it goes. But basically, we're in good shape. Where does that leave us? 19 is likely to be a good year, okay? 20, 21, 22, there's a recession out there somewhere. At this point, nobody can tell you where it is. But it's not going to be 19. You have the tax cuts, the deficit spending, the plant and equipment spending. It's tough to see how next year doesn't continue reasonably well. We're probably in the 8th inning. We're late in the game. And by the way, this is Phoenix. They finally found out why it was so hot in Phoenix. We're going to talk about the new norm. And you've heard me talk about this for several years. We are 7th in terms of job growth. And again, that's pretty good by the standards of the last couple of decades. And we'll continue to be in the top 10% probably. But things have changed in Arizona. We'll talk about the first change is almost 88% of all the jobs created in the state since the end of the recession in 2009 have been in Greater Phoenix. And you've all heard me say this before, the rest of the state could disappear and nobody would notice for several weeks. And that is God's honest truth. Tucson has become a third world country, and the rest of the state, well, I don't know. Okay, Greater Phoenix is, there are 35 major employment markets in the country. A major employment market has more than 1 million jobs. We're 5th out of that. And the joke is, if you look at the numbers, the difference between 2nd and 5th is maybe 0.2%. So it's almost a rounding error as to whether we're 2nd or 5th. But the bottom line is we're still doing very well. In terms of employment growth, we haven't reached our historic norm, but we've done very well. In fact, the employment numbers continue to be strong. And the red lines, Greater Phoenix, the blue lines, the US, we're continuing to do much better than the US. And by the way, you don't have to take pictures. These are all on my website, arizonaeconomy.com. They'll be on tomorrow. You're welcome to go and do whatever you want with them. In terms of the jobs in Phoenix, well, essentially, in terms of absolute numbers, it's education, health services, construction, professional business services, so on and so forth. And that's the way it's going to be. Education, health services, professional business services, and leisure and hospitality will create most of the jobs over a long period of time. But in terms of percentage, it's exactly as you'd expect. It's all the cyclical jobs. It's construction and it's manufacturing. And that's the way it'll continue for the next couple of years. Let's talk about population inflows. I've talked about this here before, but it's something worth repeating. This is the population growth following the last 5 recessions. And you can see that population growth this time around is really different. And the reason that's important, again, is that when you have 70,000 people showing up or 80,000 people showing up, in some years we actually had a negative migration. It was made up for by births over deaths. But when you go from, let's say, 140,000 people like you had in 2006 to 0, effectively, that you had in 2011, that means you have a whole group of people who otherwise would have come to town. They come to town, they create their own demand for goods and services. They need cars, they buy Slurpees, they go to ball games, they need housing. And when they disappear, guess what happens to all the people who service those demands? The reason that the economy here was so bad was not just housing, which is what you always hear about. It's because the basic infrastructure to service all these people essentially disappeared. And so it was dramatic, but we're over it. Population growth is supposed to be around 2% for the next few years, and I think that's as far as it's going to go, and here's why. By the way, population way below in percentage terms than normal, but in absolute numbers, we're getting back to pretty solid growth, more than 80,000 people a year. That's a big number. And relative to the US, we're still doing pretty well. So what's going on? What's going on is this is the percentage of people who move every year. And I'm not talking about moving from Mesa to Gilbert. I'm not talking about moving across the street. I'm talking about you move from a different state, you move from a different county, you move internationally. Because if you move across the street, you haven't really created any demand, okay? You play musical chairs. Well, you can see that since 2008, basically that hasn't changed very much nationally. People aren't moving. And guess who those people are who aren't moving? Millennials. We'll talk about them in a couple of minutes. Movers from outside the area, so outside the state, from a different county, and from abroad, essentially hasn't changed since the end of the recession. What has changed is Arizona's capture rate. We're doing pretty well. At one point in 2005 and 6, we were capturing 1 out of every 10 people in this country who moved. That's amazing for a state that has about 2% of the country's population. It got down to below 2%, and now it's back to about 5, and that's a 2017 number. The 2018 number will be higher. So, and by the way, to give you some perspective, last year Maricopa County was the fastest growing state or county in the country in absolute numbers. In percentage terms it wasn't, but in absolute numbers it was. So we're doing really well. That will improve, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. So let's talk about the housing market, though. The current conditions are the polar opposite of where you were in 2007 through 2011. There are no signs, and I mean 0 signs of oversupply. And there are, we'll go through these numbers, amazing pent-up demand. So the outlook for housing over the next 5 years, I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow afternoon at 3, but I can tell you over the next 5 years, you can't beat the demographics. And so the outlook is quite good. In fact, as you all know, your problem isn't lack of buyers, it's lack of sellers. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Here's the other thing I find interesting. 72% of people live in a single-family home. 22% live in a multifamily home. The others live in, mobile home parks or, on boats or whatever. But here's the most interesting thing. Single-family, renter-occupied, there are more single-family people living in single-family rentals than there are in all the apartment buildings, the big apartment buildings you see around town. Think about that, okay? There's only 85,000 big apartment buildings in town. There's 253,000 living in single-family homes. And so that is something new, and it has to do with affordability. And it's the major concern for millennials and retired people. I thought this was interesting. This is a real sign from San Francisco. Where else? All right? Come on down and buy your $1 million house. Okay. The good news is that basically the housing is relatively affordable here, and that's going to continue to bring a lot of people in. Los Angeles, the interesting thing about California, it is self-destructed, and in that self-destruction, a lot of people are leaving. And they're leaving because they can't afford it, but they're bringing the same politics that allowed California to self-destruct to Arizona. So it's going to be an interesting situation. All right, so here's an example of, these are 2 listings. I thought you'd get it. All right. So where affordability-wise, Phoenix is about where it should be. and but it's going to be a problem. And housing, existing housing, resale housing, is now above where it was in the 2006-07 period, and it's going to continue to go up. There's nothing but upward pressure on prices right now. But you take a look at it. Month supply, except for the dip in 2004, very low. And this is by metro area. Essentially, only Denver and Salt Lake have less of an inventory. Days on market continues to fall, which suggests there's more pressure. Under 250,000, incredibly low inventory. And that's going to be a thing of the past pretty soon. New home inventory, basically nothing. Vacant lots, nothing. Foreclosures, this is notices. This isn't actual foreclosures. This is a precursor of foreclosures. Nothing. So essentially, things look really good. On the other hand, for builders are facing supply side constraints. There's a constraint on buildable lots. They're going up in price, mainly because of the labor shortage. You can't get people, and therefore it's very expensive to develop these lots and to build houses. Increased construction materials cost, insufficient labor, and again, you're going to have rising mortgage rates. This means overall, it's going to be prices going up. That's all. And it's also affordability, and we'll talk about this in a second. I guess we'll talk about it now. This is the top 10 home builders, all right? The top 10 subdivision, rather, in the greater Phoenix area. What do they have in common except for the one that's circled? All below the FHA limit, okay? This is now an FHA market, period, okay? And we'll talk about why, since I'm not sure what the next slide is. It's, the top sellers are mostly small, lower priced, small lot new home communities, okay? And let's talk about millennials. I used to say derogatory things about them, rightly so, but that's another issue. First, this is the demographics I'm talking about. Nationally, virtually all new home demand over the next 10 years will come from millennials, okay? That's the market, period, right? Everything else is musical chairs. In Arizona, in Greater Phoenix, it's a little different because you've got population growth, so people above millennial age will be moving here. But essentially, millennials will be a little more than half of all demand. Okay, so what they do will affect the market. Now, how do you tell the difference between a millennial and a baby boomer? You know, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You mean update your Facebook status? That's a millennial. Baby boomers. You told me you'd spend your whole life trying to make me happy. I didn't expect to live this long. All right. You've probably seen this before because I've gone over it before. The difference between boomers and millennials when they were at the same age. 68% of boomers were married, 40% of millennials never married, 20% of boomers, 53% of millennials. Age at first marriage, close to 30 for males versus 25 for boomers. Females, it's 28 versus 22. Age at first child, 27 versus 23. Living with mommy and daddy, 22% for millennials. 1 out of 4 almost was 9% for boomers. Apparently, boomers' parents didn't like them as much. So you've got this hugely over-provided for generation. We'll talk about that in a second. Second thing you have to understand, as people age, the propensity to buy a house increases. Take a look at the second column, percent of total occupied. When you're 25 to 34, 40% of people live in single-family homes, or own single-family homes. 35 to 44, it's 56%. 45 to 54, it's 65%. So as you get older, your propensity to buy homes goes up. So not only do you have a ton more people in that age group as millennials start to age, but the propensity to buy a home goes way up. Even those who rent, take a look at the difference. When you're under